to this session is about financial innovation for social impact. I'm Stephen Wong from our Hong Kong Foundation. So let me introduce you today the two speakers, panelists. The first one is Janette POWELL, who is sitting in front. She's Director of Social Finance. And we have Paul PONG, who is a well-known asset manager, and also the chairman of Institute of Financial Planners of Hong Kong. So I thought today I would just spend 10 minutes to sort of lay down the foundation, to sort of localize the context, and then we will go right into, and I'll invite Janette to come up to share a little bit about her thoughts, and then we will have sort of a panel discussion. So when we talk about financial innovations, what are we talking about? Obviously, the aim here is that, well, finance, there is a purpose for finance. It's not just finance, it's not there to just make more financial capital. Finance there is to serve a purpose, a social purpose. For this case, is to help the aging society to transform itself into a different society that everybody can be happier. So, there are two observations to sort of link up finance and social impacts. And usually I quoted, for example, Bill Gates. He talks about, nowadays we are spending more money to cure male bonus than to cure malaria. Male bonus is obviously nice to have, you can cure it. But malaria is obviously a disease that can kill people. So, but as a society in the world, we are channeling more finance and resources into curing more male bonus than curing malaria. So obviously this shows you, there are things that we want to change in the current financial system so that the resources can be used more effectively. And today we talk about social impact bonds is exactly one of the ways to hopefully channel the financial resources more appropriately to do better things. And the second example is the head of Bank of England, Mark Carney. He said, well, don't you, people have thought that there's no relationship between climate change and finance. But what he is saying is that, well, actually, if there's a lot of climate changes, there are a lot of insurance losses. Think about, the floods, the storm, it actually would affect financial stability. So don't think, some of these things, climate change, have nothing to do with finance. They are also interlinked. And, the observation here, I think, is pretty interesting. This is in Hong Kong. The green line is the real wage index. From 2004 to now, the good news is that after inflation, our wages has increased by about 12%. So it's from 100 to 112. That's pretty good, right? That's the good news because actually we make more money than inflation, right? That's pretty good. Obviously, the bad news is, the real GDP is the red line. The real GDP actually grow faster than the wages. So you actually live by wages alone, you're probably worse off. Well, but if you actually add on top, that's the real housing price index. So, in Hong Kong, you're almost better off to be a landowner, do nothing, than a business owner successfully. Actually, then we'll still be better off than a wage earner. So, that just shows you, obviously, not necessarily just a Hong Kong phenomenon, but that provoked us to think about, hey, is this the best allocation of capital, best allocation of resources? Because, the society, is it sustainable to have a background like that? So as a result, you do hear a lot about, nowadays, responsible investment, sustainable investment, and finally, impact investment. This is exactly what we're trying to solve, is to actually channel the financial resources more appropriately. In this case, for example, to solve the social problem, or actually take the opportunity of solving the social problems. Now, today we talk about pay for success. Some people call it social impact bonds, but I think Janette also agreed that we probably want to avoid the terms of bond, but we talk about sort of pay for success model. What it is very simple. Think about this, right? We are let's say the NGO have a program that can that will be able to get less youth delinquency into going to prison, so that they have less youth going into prison because of the NGO program. Let's say the NGO program costs $100, right? So if the NGO program is successful, then you will have the $100, right? If that's successful, you actually have less youth going into prison. That will save the government $200, right? So therefore, the government, if the program is successful, should be willing to reimburse the investor who actually paid $100 to the NGO up to almost $200 or $150. So they will be able to willing, right, because they saved $200, but the program only costs $100. They will, if they give back the $150 that they saved, then the investor will have a 50% return. So it's actually quite simple, right? Well, the execution is obviously a lot harder than the concept. The concept is simple. It's the detail. It's the devil is always in the detail and execution, which I'm sure Janette will have a lot of story on that. So there are a lot of benefits of doing that. I had to sell this a little bit because in Hong Kong we haven't done one yet. So in order to actually get people excited, I need to sort of share the advantages of doing that. First of all, it is an outcome-based measurement, which I will elaborate a bit more. It's also risk sharing for the government. Some people say that, well, government have no lack of money because they're so rich, they have so much cash. But hey, if the investor is willing to share the risk with you, for example, if the investor put $100, but the program fails, then the government don't have to pay back anything, right? So the government actually save money in this case. So it's a bit of a risk-sharing concept from the government taking all the risks of the success of the program to sharing that with the private sector. So that's risk-sharing. And then potentially long-term cost saving because a lot of these are preventive measures, preventive programs that actually will save on the long term because it's not remedial programs. And finally, I think it actually give us an opportunity to do impact investment. Now, I think this chart is quite interesting because a lot of our social programs are what we call output-based instead of outcome-based. In Hong Kong, the first line are, we look at all the, social services, whether elderly, family, rehabilitation, a lot of them are output-based. What is the difference between output-based and outcome-based? Output-based means that the government spend the money to the program, and then they'll just mark up, hey, how many people used, this program, and so come to the meeting, come to the session, come to the workshop. But hey, are they better off because of that? Not a lot of them measure the outcome. Outcome is actually whether you benefit from it. So not a lot of a program actually measures outcome, but a lot of programs measure output. So hopefully, in order for this sort of pay for success model to succeed, they need to measure outcome. And hopefully, we can drive the culture of measuring outcome instead of output for a lot of social programs. I will jump right to the end because I want to hear Janette say and Paul then myself. So I would just, give a little bit of a policy recommendations and what the government can do. First of all, I think in the government, we need to sort of encourage a bit more of a social impact measurement culture. A lot of our policies and programs, we don't measure outcome, therefore we just focus on output. If you always focus on output, you can never build a social impact investment market. And second is to standardize a contract. For example, in New South Wales, in Australia, they actually, under the Treasury Department, have a standardized package, standardized contract for social pay for success contracts. And third, hopefully, when we talk about ESG these days, environment, social, and governance reporting, it doesn't include impact investment. And hopefully, the impact investment, i.e., you are investing not just for financial return, as I say in the very beginning, but also for social and environmental return. And hopefully, impact investment can be a mainstream ESG category, which it is not right now. And number four, hopefully the government can do a little bit more facilitation. And finally, I think if you think about what really the government can do, because I do policy and advocacy, and I think there are two things at least they can do to sort of promote the impact investment from first the stock exchange perspective, and second from Hong Kong Monetary Authority. And if I ask you who are one of the biggest institutional investor in Hong Kong, obviously it has to be Hong Kong Monetary Authority because he has all your cash. How much? About 3 trillion Hong Kong dollars. So 3 trillion, how many zeros are there in trillions? You don't know, right? You have to count, but it's a lot of money. If the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, which has all of our money, can actually embrace this concept of the principle of responsible investment, which is pretty common in the UN and pretty common for a lot of sovereign wealth funds, then at least they can start thinking about, are there better use of our cash? Is our cash just there to make financial resources or to make other social impacts, which is not being considered at the moment? So having said this, I will invite Janette to come and share with her experiences. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me here today. As you said, there's a lot of technical expertise in the world around social impact bonds. There's none of it here. What I'll be talking to you about is what it feels like on the ground, so how to deliver a social impact bond and the impact that it has on a community. If you have any technical or finance questions today, these are the gentlemen that you need to speak to. So I will be talking you through what it feels like, how organizations work together, and most importantly, how it impacts the people on the ground. I'm going to start with this slide just to give you an idea of how things have taken off in the UK. We've just had an announcement that we have a Minister for Loneliness. And we were just as surprised as anybody else that we would have a Minister for Loneliness. But I think that just gives you a sense of how this has escalated in the UK as an issue that we have grasped and brought new finance to, but also that our government is starting to realise the impact of an ageing population. The Minister for Loneliness will also be looking at young people, but she did come to our organisation and has said that she'll be passionately working with the older population because she understands the health impacts that this has. So the UK has gone from a position of not using a social impact bond 10 years ago to now having 100 of these type of instruments out there in 20 different countries and have attracted 300 million UK pounds to work in this field. So it's something that has exploded in our area, and I hope that you get to use it too because it's a very exciting instrument. We have a little video that I want to show you just to give some context and to remind us about the people that we're working with. Now, in Hong Kong, I can imagine that you would say, how can you be lonely in Hong Kong? There are millions and millions of people living very close together. But this gentleman in the video is explaining how you can feel lonely even though you live with other people. This gentleman lives with his family. So can we just have the first video, please?
The problem is you've got a house full of noise and all this, that and the other, but it's not sort of connecting with me. You know, they do this and that and the other, and it's one of these smartphone worlds now, and I'm just not capable of sort of living in that situation. And so, yes, I'm there and I can hear all these voices, but it's not me, it's nothing to do with me sort of thing. Can you see how lonely you can get in a crowd?
So Alf says there how lonely he can be even though he lives with lots of other people, especially in this world of technology. I think it's very easy to walk along looking at our phones, and a generation like Alf's isn't able to always use that technology. They don't understand how to use it, or they don't want to use it. They want to speak face to face to people, and that isn't always the case now in our communities. Now, there's some health impacts of loneliness. You'll see here they're quite stark. Having weak social connections does carry a health risk, and this is one of the reasons why our government was looking at this issue. It's the equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day, or even being a drinker, an alcoholic. And you're more likely to visit the doctor, you're more likely to go into care. And so we started to think about this issue of what it's costing society, and were we able to put a figure to that? Could we say how much it costs to be lonely? And if we could we show how much money we could save if we were able to solve this social issue? And once a government starts thinking like this, then they're able to attract new money to try and solve those situations. So we'll just have a look now at the key players of who might be able to make these social changes. An administration, obviously they have already got these public services that they're responsible for. They're responsible for finding new initiatives, but often they have contracts that are quite specific, quite controlled, and often the smaller delivery partners in the social sector are not able to win those contracts, so they're excluded from that market. We also find sometimes that governments are not very creative, if that's a good way to put it. So they do things as they've always done them, and they don't have time to consider these innovative solutions. So another group of people that are involved in making changes is the community themselves. There are lots of social sector providers out there. They might be very small, but because they're not winning these contracts, the government isn't seeing them. And one of the joys of the social impact bond is it is enabling those smaller organizations to get involved. Because if you remember the talk just now, it said that the risk is all held by the investors. The investors give their money to the delivery partners who provide the service. There is no risk to those small delivery partners. They get paid all of their costs up front so that they can deliver the service. The other team of people that are involved are the investors. And people often say to me, what type of investors do you have in the UK that would invest in something like this? Are they interested in the money or are they interested in the social impact? And I would say both. But they're often philanthropic investors who agree that something needs to change, but they're not quite sure how that should happen. Or maybe they're not interested in the subject area of the elderly or loneliness, but they're interested in the finance. And they say, we want to grow this sector. We want lots of investment in this area, and we want to help you make a social impact bond work because we want to advertise what it's doing and get more investment. Or it might be that they have a personal interest. Maybe their trust and foundation was set up to deal with the elderly or to deal with loneliness or mental health problems or prisons. And so that's why they're coming to the table. Our investors stay involved in how the project develops, and sometimes they are very interested in the learning that we get, the new way of working and the learning that comes back from the programs. On the second line there, you'll see clients are here, and often clients are missed out in these conversations. The government decides there's a problem, there's a solution, and off they go and create something. But people forget to ask about the clients on the ground and the people working with them. They also forget to see what else is going on in the area. In the UK, often these things, if they're sexy and popular, they get the money, and they don't look around and see what else is going on. And maybe there's duplication, maybe there's gaps. And so the other importance about speaking to clients and the community is understanding the context that you'll be working in to make sure that these things can work on the ground. Next along is the innovators. I think one of the criticisms that I would have of the governments that I've worked with at national and local level is they're often too quick. They just rush all the time, needing to be busy, and they don't take time to think. When I work with my mentees, I have 2 people that I mentor, and I say to them, I want you to take half a day a week thinking time. Just go and sit in a park, go and sit somewhere and think. Don't feel you have to rush to find solutions. The good thing about a social impact bond is it's the start, it's not the end. It's the beginning of a different way of working. You don't have to have all the answers before you say yes to a social impact bond. You just have to have a social problem and some people that want to tackle it. And then the solution is found along that journey. And I think the governments that have been brave are the ones that are willing to take that risk. And they're not risking any of their money. They're just risking their ideas. And so it's about saying, give us those ideas. They might fail, but you have to be brave enough to fail to make those changes. And they're the governments that sign up to this type of work. And then they see the benefits. And lastly, in terms of the key players, we have the evaluators. The evaluators of social impact bonds are usually academic institutions, and they're usually independent of the project. They're very robust in the way that these measures are made so that everybody can agree it was the right answer. We don't want any worry afterwards that maybe something wasn't done properly. So it's all done independently, and it's very robust measurement. Sometimes it's done internally by another department in government. So for example, if it was a social impact bond dealing with employment, well, the government has employment data that they can access, so that would be used rather than collecting any more. But on this project, on loneliness, we have a set of measures that are used, and we ask specific questions of our clients to show distance travelled. So in other words, at beginning, middle, and end, we ask them a set of questions, and the evaluators use that information. It's very robust, and even the calls that we make to the clients are recorded so that they can audit the work that we've done with those clients when we're doing the assessments. So I'm just going to quickly whiz through the diagram that was already used. Thank you. So just a reminder, social impact bond, it's not a bond. It's a contract between a government, some investors, and a service provider. You start with the social issue, loneliness. The government agrees it's a problem and it's costing money. The social investors say, hi, we can help, we're interested, we want to play this game. Then you have the service providers. It's really important that you pick some service providers that want to bring about change. It's not about doing the same thing that they've always done. It's about saying this is a new issue, it's a difficult issue. We need to bring about some change here. So you need to be flexible and come on this journey with us. That's really important. So then the government, social investors have the contract. Social investors pay the service providers do an amazing service and make a change. That can be evidenced, and then only if it works does the government pay back the social investors. So that was the same as we've just looked at. So how do we use it on the ground? We have a team of service providers out in the field, and they work alongside our clients. We have about 1,500 clients working on the program over a 3-year period. And they are managed by a team of caseworkers. So these are support staff who get alongside the clients, understand their needs, because it's individual service, understand their needs, and then allocate a volunteer who has similar interests. So if I was to be matched to a client, I like running, I like healthy eating, I like music, they would match me to somebody with similar interests. And we would then work together for around 6 to 9 months. And during that time, the project would then understand more about their loneliness. What triggered it? Was it a bereavement, a loss of a pet, unemployment, moving house? We would understand more of those triggers and feed that learning back into the project and to the government. These volunteers that we work with come from a whole wide variety of backgrounds. And one of the things that we've learned through this program is how to attract volunteers in a busy community where people are working and traveling. How can we engage them? How can we get them involved in this project? And we've had a lot of learning there. My role in the project is to work alongside the delivery partners to make it work, whatever is needed to make it work. That might be at strategic level, working with government. It might be that I work with investors, or it might be that I work with delivery teams on the ground. But I work as a whole to make sure that the project achieves what it needs to. In terms of the measurement that we use something that was developed in America. And the scale that we use, the 4 questions that it's asking, are very specific questions that have been designed to test whether somebody is lonely. In terms of our learning from the project, I think we would like to include some questions around health and well-being, some more questions around mental health. So if we were going to do this again, we would probably look to explore some other scales in addition to this UCLA one. In terms of how the service works, we would engage and refer from a whole range of people in the community. So that could be an ambulance service that has gone to collect somebody from their home, or it could be a neighbour or a taxi driver. Anybody in the community can refer in. We go and visit them at home and assess their needs, and then we would arrange some first step activities with them. And the joy of working on a social impact bond is the money is very, very flexible. So we say to our clients, what do you want to do? And they might say, I have a bucket list of things I want to do. Or they might say, I have no idea. I'd like you to help me find things that I like. And we can connect people with other people, with places and activities in their community, and work with the local government to develop new services as they're needed. So it can be something that expands and grows as the community needs. It's not a structured program that we take somewhere and do it to people. It's about growing it. It's about working with other people in that area and coming up with what we call the SIB effect, which is working differently. So it's not just about the money. It's about growing things and working in partnership. Once we've engaged the volunteer, we help that individual to grow towards independence. It's not about building dependency on us. It's about growing their social networks. So from start to finish, we want them to go from a place of isolation to a place where they're connected to lots of other projects. And often, those clients then become volunteers for us because they want to engage with the program, which is a fantastic outcome. I have a video now of somebody, one of the matches, just so you can see it in action. This is somebody called Joe, and he has his volunteer called Becky. And they have a lot of fun together, but I wanted them to explain to us what they've felt from the journey that they've experienced. Thank you.
How I'm describing is I've come awake again, if that makes sense.
That's lovely, lovely description.
Yeah.
That's a really nice,
Yeah.
It's like, I seem to think like a lot of these older people, this is a thing that sort of hits me a bit, it's like a lot of these older people, you know, they just exist, you know, and they need to live, more so than us young ones, you know, they need to be able to, at the end of the day, if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be here. So people like us, we need to make these older people to actually live again. I think just because you're sat in the house, just because you're getting old, doesn't mean to say that you can't live your life as much. You need to live your life as much as you possibly can. And, we've got to help you do that.
Right. And it was like, they leave it like reconnections, and that's exactly what it is. You're reconnecting to life.
So he has quite a strong accent, but what he says is it's reconnected me to life. And this is somebody who was referred by his doctor. He was very, very unwell, very depressed, and wasn't engaging with community at all. He's now out all the time. If you ring him, he's never in. And they're out having fun. They're involved with what's going on. He was very poorly, and now he's well again. He's not visiting the doctor. He's not going into hospital. And he's saved, in terms of the money, he's saved a lot of money because he's not engaging with those crisis interventions all the time. The preventative work has enabled him to look after his body and his mind. And he's now contributing to our community by volunteering alongside us. So it's a really positive story of how they can work together. What I would say about the social impact bond is we don't just hear the happy stories. We're always critical of ourselves and saying, what about those people that we're not helping? How are we reaching out to them? And what's great about this type of funding and this type of focus is that there are lots of people around that partnership asking those questions because it is a partnership. It's not me saying you're not running this contract right or you're not delivering a service. It's saying, are you having a problem delivering this service? Let's have a conversation about that. How can we work together to achieve an outcome? Because we're talking about long-term outcomes. On more traditional contracts, you meet them once a month and you say, you haven't hit this target, you haven't hit this target. Maybe I apply a penalty, or maybe we end your contract. That's not how the SIB works. The SIB says, how can we work together? Do we need government to do something different? Do we need some money to do something different? Or do we need to engage as a team together differently? So it's very close partnership working. And we see that the governments that we work with, after maybe 6-7 months, suddenly they understand this. To begin with, they think this is just about money. They hear social impact bond and think it's free money, it's no risk money. But then they realize over time that no, this is a new way of working. This is a different partnership approach. And it's robust, but it's also imaginative. And those two things don't normally go together. And so it's a really exciting way of working. So just looking now at the way that we use the metrics, what's really good about working with social finance is there's an awful lot of very clever people who like data. And often on contracts working with the social sector, they don't like data. They don't want to collect it. They don't want to use it. Even if they do collect it, nobody looks at it. But what's good about this is we have a team behind the scenes that is analyzing this data all the time. And it might be they say to me, did you know that you only have people coming on your program from here, but not here? Or they're this age, but not that age. Or they have these health problems, but not those ones. Maybe they have this interest area. Or you need more volunteers who like singing. A whole range of information is fed to us all the time so that we can change things on the ground. And to give you one example, when we first started working on this program, there weren't enough volunteers to make it work. The project wasn't working. And we changed the way that we recruit and train volunteers based on the information that we had about what they needed. We now have more than one volunteer a day is applying to join our service, which is a massive difference over that period of time. So we've now got more volunteers than we need to work on this project. There are lots of other ways we've worked with them to improve the collection rates, to improve the loneliness scores, because we have this lovely balance between lots of really rich, beautiful data. We have money, and we have people that are passionate about what they're doing. And those things very, very rarely come together at the right time for you to work on these sort of programs. So yeah, that's the social impact bond in a nutshell. And I think we'll have a bit more of a discussion about that. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Janette. Can you have a seat? Yes, and we invite Paul as well to have a chat. So let me give you a mic. I would love to have a dialogue instead of just one-way discussion. So happy to, if you have any sort of questions, but think about that. But before you ask the questions, I will, give some time for Paul. You listen to the presentation, and what is your sort of reactions?
I think my reaction is very positive because I think this is a very innovative. Of course, it's not a bond. I think it's a bond, but a contract, you can trade a contract like the bonds. But I have some questions. First of all, the investor. I think they are all institutional investors. Most of them are NGO, isn't it? But if you involve individual investor, I think it's very good. Because for individual investor, you need helper, you need partners. So those individual investors, sometimes they will bring money to you as well. They want to do something, social service. If you can do this, I think you can do both ways. Yeah. But if you have individual investor or even institutional investor, you need some idea like Stephen already mentioned is the stock exchange, like something like stock exchange. You would like to trade your contract or your bond because for some of the project, for example, is too big. I cannot take all of them. Maybe I will take part of them. So whether there is someone who can take part of it, and then you need an exchange, like the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, of course. Sometimes exchange now you have the internet, very easy to have an exchange, and then you can, even the Bitcoin have the exchange. I think we can have the exchange to doing some deals. Then you can trade your contract or split your contract to partially and then sell to individual or some.
So you're talking about three issues, like first of all, what type of investors, institutional or retail? Second,
or both.
Yeah, or both. Or second is the primary syndication. You know, how do you syndicate?
Yes.
How do you sort of get together? And thirdly is the transfer, secondary market. Do you have a secondary market? So three questions, at least, you know. So, yeah, but
Second two won't be for me.
but for the first one though, is it true that most of the investors that you see are still sort of institutional foundations, that sort of impact investors?
I would say, though, the market is growing really, really rapidly. As I said, 300 million already has been invested and lots of programs. Most of the investors are philanthropic. They are trusts and foundations, but we're getting more and more interest now from high net worth individuals. And, you know, I personally would love there to be a retail market just for me individually to be able to invest in something that is meaningful. And we do get a lot of inquiries like that. At the moment, obviously, they're very risky investments, so it would have to be for people that are in the field already. But yeah, I see that in the future, not too distant future, we will have these things available because the way that the market has grown so quickly.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, right now the bottleneck seems like, which is my next question, it seems like the bottleneck is not finding investors. The bottleneck is, at least in Hong Kong, is to get the government involved as a payer. As a payer.
One of the major stakeholders.
Yes. But for investors, you know, some of the ideas in the future, you know, maybe for syndication, you can have sort of crowdfunding, right? Syndication, or you know, for you know, so that you can move beyond sort of just institutional investor involvement. But what is your advice? Then it's my next question to. You know, because right now in Hong Kong, it is true that the government does seems like to, you know, still figuring out whether they should use this. And if they were to use this, you know, which department they should get involved first. Yeah. You guys must have gone through the same thing.
Absolutely, yeah.
And the same pain that you sort of, when you deal with the government.
Yeah, so. And it's easier for Hong Kong because there's a track record now. We did the first one and that was very risky.
We're good at following.
So now we have lots of these and so we understand a lot more about the programs, and obviously the US and Israel are also developing some in their offices. And the governments have to be brave. I think I've only spent 2 days in Hong Kong, but my observation so far has been that people like to get things right. And with a social impact bond, you don't have to have it all figured out before you start. You have to take a step back and be brave here, agree to the bond. You know, all you need is a social issue, work out how much it costs and how much you could save, find some decent social providers, or at least ones that are willing to give it a bash, have an intermediary that can act on your behalf, and go. You don't have to have it all sussed out now.
What really struck me when you said some of the terms that really ring the bell, for example, working differently, you know, figure out a way that is innovative.
Yeah.
And this sounds so foreign to me, literally, because I think, as you said, you know, we tend to be a bit more conservative in the way of, you know, trying to do it right in a way that is a nice way to put it, but really it's just business as usual. But some of these problems seems like it's hard to be solved by business as usual.
Yeah.
But the next question for Paul is, you know, from the investor point of view, what are the obstacles of making this a bit more mainstream so that, you know, when you speak to your investor, they will understand, hey, you know, it's not just about buying, stock, buying Tencent, or, you can actually buy something else with your capital.
Something different.
Something different.
For memorable, I think it's very good. But I think, first of all, of course, when you do the investment, you need the endorsement from the government, because the government endorsement is because the return is based on the measurement, outcome measurement, and then paid back by the government. So the government support is very important. And secondly, I think the service provider or the innovator, if you find out something you should push forward, I think they are the center of the whole project. They link up all the government, all the investor, and evaluator, and community, and all this, without the good service provider. So can we have any ranking or something, for the service provider? We should build that up in future.
Yeah.
So that, this is very good, this is small scale, big scale, or ABC, or,
That's an interesting point, because you did mention that, the importance of service provider is that the service provider needs to be innovative, need to, willing to take risks,
Yeah.
yes.
willing to do something differently. But that is very difficult, right? Because a lot of the service providers are funded by the government. If the government is not willing to change, then obviously the service provider is not changing.
Two things, so picking up on both those issues. I think for the government to be able to accept something like this, they have to accept that it's different, not try and fit it into the mold of what normal looks like. And I think that makes the whole process a lot easier. The minute you've decided, you know what, this is different, the rules don't apply to this, it's different, then you can move on to the next stage, which is saying, who have we got out there that thinks differently? And it doesn't have to be lots of service providers. You could have a few that they're pretty good and have some that are completely new. On this program, we had one service provider who had never worked with older people before. Big risk for us. They are our best delivery partner, by far, better than the lead delivery partner who's been working with older people for generations. So it's not always about picking the best, the ones with the track record. I mean, obviously you do due diligence, but you also have to take a risk on them. As long as you have an intermediary that is able to work alongside them and pick them up and work with them to achieve outcomes and to keep them focused on outcomes. We found that some delivery partners slip back into the old style contracts. We just have to get 5 people through the door. It doesn't matter if they're happy when they go out, as long as 5 come in, because that's what the contract says. So we have to remind them, no, we're looking at the long-term goal. We're doing things differently here. And for the first few months, we have to work very closely with them. So if you do have a program which is more risky because you're not sure of the intervention, you're not sure of the service providers because you don't have the track record in the country, but you have a brave government that says, we're not going to have to pay unless it works. Let's just get on with it. That's where the excitement comes in. But you have to give them that freedom to say, we are trusting you to try something different. You can't keep pulling it back. It's yours, but it's not. It's yours, but it's not. You have to say, this is different. This is new. We only pay if it works. So off you go. Go and do it. And the minute you make that step, everybody can think differently and more creatively. But you can't half do it. You can't say it's yours and then keep picking at it and pulling bits back. It has to be all together.
You need to be back very often and just talk to the government people with the same thing that you just talked about. Because I think it is key is, for government to actually really be arm's length from the sort of provider. Because from their perspective, even though they don't have to pay, they will have so-called reputational risk, right? But that's exactly, you don't have that risk if you don't have to pay. So, but I think that's sort of a mental leap forward.
It's a jump. It is a jump. And it was for our government, and still is. Every single contract we have, the government starts off thinking, is this okay? Is this okay? And then over time, they relax and they say, yes, this is a different way of working, but I like it. I like the added value. The number of times I've been in a government meeting halfway through a social impact bond and they've said, I wasn't expecting this added value, the SIB effect, the extra things that you get from working differently. They just thought we might get the outcomes, but what they got was a whole lot more. And then they say to us, can you run another project? Can you run another project? So every time you get the same response. Suspicion, lack of trust, then they like you, then they want more. Wow. Every time.
That's very encouraging. But I would love to invite a bit more people to join in our conversation. So if you have a comment or a question, please raise your hand, and do we have microphone to circulate around? I can be the person doing that.
Yes.
Thank you. It's a very interesting discussion. So we've heard about how flexible and the British government is and give you a lot of free hand in doing what you would like to do, and then it's successful. But whereas in Hong Kong, we know that the mindset of the government is quite different. I'm not sure if we have anybody from the government. But anyway, because the government has to be accountable to the Legislative Council for public money, so it needs to be very cautious in making use of every cent of funding. So I'm just thinking, it's a weird thought. Would it be possible for us to have a kind of social impact bond or pay for success bond without the government's endorsement, but perhaps endorsement from a consortium, from a big institutional investor, somebody who's willing to underwrite it?
Yeah.
So maybe Paul can give us your professional view, and then Janette on whether it's possible or not. Thank you.
I think certainly is, because I think, first of all, the outcome from the government is they endorse it and then they pay. So I think if we have like Jockey Club or some NGO and all this, if they think that they want to do something, so they identify some very good social, maybe service provider, and then he can link that up, and they can be the investor and also the administration. And then just the service provider to link up all this. But I think one thing is the evaluator as well. How you identify whether they are good or bad, because it's new. Whether they have any standard or, how to, or accountant, we have to find an accountant to do it because it's the numbers and all this, or find a financial planner, CFA or CFP to do it.
So the two questions, maybe Janette can comment a little bit, because we did talk about that ourselves as well, whether we can change it from pay for success, paid by the government really for success, to donate for success. For example, donate by one of the biggest funder in Hong Kong is Jockey Club. So donate for success model, is it something to be helpful as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you want to apply rules.
Right.
You can use money however you want to use money.
That's true.
Social impact bond is an idea.
Right.
You can have your own ideas of whatever you call it next. So if you decide that the way you want to use this idea is to have a pilot and to use other funders for the original. What we did after time to help some of the government departments that were a little bit worried about the reputation or using so much money to set aside, we had an outcomes fund. So the big lottery in our country put money towards an outcomes fund. So they paid, say, 30% of outcomes payments. So that just softened it a little bit, because it meant it wasn't just the government, it was the government and somebody else. And it meant that the money wasn't all their outcomes, the money was coming from somewhere else. But it's about making it fit. The social impact bond isn't, social impact bond is a fixed way of doing things in a sense, but it was an idea once, and there will be other ideas following on from that. So Hong Kong can have its own way of using money and working on partnership for its pilot. I think absolutely that's what you should be thinking. How can we do this? How can we structure it in our country to make it work? And if that then leads to social impact bonds in the future or something else in the future, that's the excitement. All the social impact bond does is create a new way of thinking and working together using investors' money. Now, you might use that completely differently here, but I think absolutely, to Rebecca's point, I think it's really important to pilot things. Don't try and do it. If it doesn't fit, don't try and do it the way somebody else has done it. Try and find a way that works for your government so that they can have confidence in it, using whatever mechanisms you need, but pull on the learning from the other countries, from social impact bonds and other things, so that you can learn and grow and then feed back to us what you're doing. So we might try that next. You might invent something completely different.
Can you also comment on Paul's questions about sharing your experience on Evaluator? Because one of the problem in Hong Kong is obviously we don't have a culture of doing a lot of social impact assessment on all sorts of social policies, aside from some health problems. But therefore, we don't have a database. We don't have sort of to look at or to easily find database of values that we can sort of point to. So make the whole evaluation process a bit more difficult.
So we didn't have that either. So I think when I've worked with America, they have a lot of data going back years and years that you can say, well, I know that this is going to come out with that outcome. We didn't have any of that. Most of our social providers are not collecting data, and if they are, they're not looking at it, so it's not consistent. it's not making sense. We also have a lot of academics who look at data, and so we wanted to understand how we were going to attach values to some of these metrics. So our conversation wasn't necessarily with the evaluators, it was just between government, the intermediary, and the investors to decide. So it didn't have to be something that was a historic figure that had been agreed before. What matters is that these people agree. There doesn't have to be a rule about it somewhere that you say, well, this is X equals that. It's what do we think? What is the value to us? And if we decide it's £5, all three agree it's £5, it's £5. Even if a whole database said it should be 7 or 4, because the deal is between these people. And then the evaluator, you just need to have somebody who you all agree is a robust person to do that. So whether that's the academics or whoever. So that side of it was slightly easier for us because we have a lot of institutions who are experienced in collecting the data and then feeding it back to government. We do a lot of that side. Right. So yeah, but the actual deal that's struck, that just has to be agreed by those parties.
That's interesting. Vivian.
Thank you. Oh, okay. Right. So I actually would like to suggest, from the health impact viewpoint, it's much easier for us to do the evaluation. Our policy for the coming year has been determined that we'll have a special primary and community healthcare center that would actually deliver a lot of the preventive measures. And just now, when you mentioned about loneliness, the outcome was actually, the gentleman actually needed less health service. Yeah. Now, that is very easy to calculate. Yeah. And indeed, I've written on this about, for public health, it's very, very simple. We have cost-effective analysis. All the health economics part is all very solid science. And then we do have the data. The hospital authority has very good data. Department of Health has good data, and census and statistics have a good data as well. So indeed, by regions, by communities, we could actually collect those, and then then you could actually compare before and after quite easily. So I guess if we want to do that is indeed possible.
Yeah. There are some sectors that are easier than others. So absolutely, health is a very rich subject area in terms of data and cost analysis. There are others that aren't so easy, or there are some that need a bit of digging. So for example, keeping children out of care, the cost associated with that compared to people living in a family home. The first SIB I worked on was reducing reoffending. There was a lot of discussion about who should pay the outcomes, because you have health benefits of staying out of prison and out of crime. It's obviously Ministry of Justice, maybe the Department for Employment. So there were lots and lots of departments that could possibly have a saving to be made. And you have to draw the line somewhere. It would have taken us about 10 years to develop that first SIB if we'd have tried to include all of those departments. So we just picked which one it was most relevant to, which was justice.
But I think her idea is very good. We can use now the fintech, using the AI, using the big data. And then you can continually and also monitor the process. Yeah. Because I think the AI can be the validator. They can use all the data and then come out regularly with the result and monitoring what is the progress and all this.
And where
I think this should be very good.
Where you have some data like that, you can have a benchmark. So you can say, we know what the rest of the country is doing, or we know what people who aren't receiving the service. For others, you need to do distance traveled for an individual. Where there's less data, where there's not already a baseline, then you would say, well, we just want somebody to go from this position to this position as an individual. So sometimes you would do it per cohort and have a tariff based on that, and other times it would be distance traveled or an outcome star for an individual. Yeah. So it depends what data is out there as to whether you can apply a benchmark or whether you need to just agree a new figure between you.
Yeah, no, I think I agree in Hong Kong, because one of the biggest policy research area is in the health area, because the budget is largest every year. So they tend to do a bit more sort of scientific cost-benefit analysis and more data available than other areas. So I agree that, potentially that's probably one of the first areas that Hong Kong can focus on. But yes. Questions? 你後邊同埋粉紅色衫嗰個。
I would like to back to the question just raised by Rebecca on the role of government. Not only Hong Kong, I think government in the world tends to be more conservative and risk averse. Yes. and to try such kind of SIB or payment for resale. A question to Ms. POWELL. I learned from US in New York City, the Rikers Islands, the case run by Goldman Sachs. In that case, it seems that the government role is lower, and the Bloomberg philosophy played the role of warranty to guarantee the final result of the project. Is this a case? Is this case somewhat different from your case in UK, especially on the role of the government?
Which is similar to what we just discussed. We talk about Jockey Club being the guarantor, so which is the New York case.
I think Jockey Club in Hong Kong could play such kind of role.
Yeah, it can be different players depending on the context. Rikers Island was very different. They had a lot of people that were involved. I think their project was also very different because they didn't have an intermediary like us further down the chain. So they involved Social Finance US in brokering the deal, if you like, but then they didn't have the performance management involvement down the line. So each of these projects can look very different. And that's what I was saying about there don't have to be rules that you follow. Yeah. It's just about getting the partnership that works for that organization.
So we have only a couple more minutes. Why don't we take the last two questions together and then we sort of round it up. So the first one is this lady here. And then any, yes. Okay. Any other questions that you have? That you want to ask, comments, and share your thoughts? No? If not, I wanted to thank you again, Janette and Paul. Thanks for your time and your sharing is very enlightening. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.